Kethvar stood before the massive view screen aboard the flagship Dominion's Edge, watching the stars blur past as they traveled through hyperspace. His forearms crossed behind his back in the traditional stance of a Vorth warrior receiving orders. The metal implants along his skull gleamed under the blue lighting of the command center, marking him as one of the collective's most experienced killers. Commander Zixith's voice echoed through the chamber as holographic displays showed tactical information about their target. The planet appeared on screen, a small blue and green world called Kepler 442b by the humans who had claimed it. Intelligence reports scrolled past showing mining operations, population estimates, and defensive capabilities. The humans have established a colony on this world, Zixith explained, his three eyes focusing on different data streams simultaneously. They call it New Dakota. Our scouts report approximately 300 individuals, mostly civilians engaged in mining rare earth elements that the collective requires for our expansion. Kethvar studied the tactical readouts with the cold efficiency that had made him successful across 17 previous campaigns. The human settlement appeared primitive by Vorth standards. Basic defensive walls constructed from local materials, outdated plasma rifles that were at least 2 generations behind current military technology, a handful of mining vehicles that could potentially be weaponized but posed no real threat to properly equipped soldiers. The humans have been given standard terms, Zixith continued. Surrender their mining rights and relocate to designated sectors or face elimination. They have refused our generous offer. The commander's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among their species. Kethvar felt no such emotion. To him, this was simply another assignment. Another species that had chosen extinction over cooperation with the natural order of the galaxy. Your strike force consists of 50 elite soldiers, Zixith said, gesturing to the roster that appeared beside the planet's image. All veterans of previous pacification campaigns. Intelligence suggests this operation should conclude within 6 hours of planetary insertion. Kethvar nodded once. 6 hours seemed generous for such a lightly defended target. His previous campaign against the crystalline beings of Theta Prime had taken only 4 hours, and they had possessed energy shields and quantum weaponry. These humans appeared to have nothing more advanced than chemical explosives and kinetic weapons. The colony leader is identified as Jake Morrison, Zixith added, bringing up a grainy surveillance image. Former military service in something called the Earth Defense Corps. Age 43 standard years. Married with 2 offspring. No significant tactical experience beyond basic infantry training. The image showed a human male with graying hair and weathered features. He looked tired, like someone who had worked hard for many years. Kethvar had seen thousands of such faces across dozens of worlds. They all looked the same in the end, defeated, pleading, accepting their fate when faced. With superior force, rules of engagement are standard, Zixith concluded. No survivors. The mining equipment is to be preserved for immediate collective use. Any resistance is to be crushed without mercy. Kethvar's transport ship detached from the flagship 12 hours later. The journey to the planet's surface gave him time to review the intelligence files in detail. The human settlement had been established 7 years ago by families seeking to escape the overcrowded systems of human space. They had chosen this remote world specifically because it was far from major shipping lanes and military installations. The irony was not lost on Kethvar. The humans had sought isolation and peace, only to discover valuable resources that made them a target for the collective's expansion. Their desire to remain hidden had simply delayed their inevitable encounter with a superior species. As his ship entered the planet's atmosphere, Kethvar studied the settlement through the tactical scanners. New Dakota sprawled across a valley, between 2 mountain ranges, with the main mining operations carved into the northern hillside. Residential areas surrounded a central hub containing what appeared to be administrative buildings, a medical facility, and educational structures. The defensive preparations were laughably inadequate. The humans had constructed earthwork barriers, around the settlement's perimeter, with guard towers at regular intervals. A few heavy weapons emplacements were visible, but they appeared to be mining lasers retrofitted for defensive use rather than proper military equipment. Kethvar's soldiers reported ready for deployment as the transport ship hovered over the landing zone. 50 Vorth warriors in full combat armor, equipped with plasma weapons, energy shields, and tactical support systems that gave them overwhelming advantages over any primitive opposition. Movement detected in the settlement, reported Subcommander Grexith from the sensor station. Humans are taking defensive positions. Estimated response time suggests they detected our approach approximately 10 minutes ago. Kethvar was mildly impressed. Most species didn't notice Vorth ships until they were already under attack. These humans had at least maintained some level of alertness despite their isolation. The transport touched down in the valley floor, approximately 2 kilometers from the settlement's outer perimeter. Kethvar was the first to disembark, his boots hitting the alien soil with practiced confidence. The planet's gravity was slightly lower than Vorth standard, which would give his soldiers additional speed and agility advantages. Through his helmet's sensors, he could see heat signatures moving throughout the human settlement. They were evacuating non-combatants to interior positions, while armed defenders took positions along the perimeter. Standard defensive doctrine for a weaker force facing superior attackers. Grexith, take Squad Alpha and circle to the eastern approach, Kethvar commanded through his comm system. Squad Beta will advance from the south. I will lead Squad Gamma in a direct assault from the west. Standard suppression pattern. Eliminate all resistance and drive survivors toward the central hub for final elimination. His soldiers acknowledged the orders and moved out across the valley floor. Their powered armor allowed them to cover ground quickly while their energy shields deflected the first tentative shots from human defenders. The plasma bolts fired at them from the guard towers were poorly aimed and lacked the power to penetrate modern Vorth defenses. As they approached the settlement's outer perimeter, Kethvar activated his suit's external speakers, standard protocol, required offering the enemy one final opportunity to surrender, though he had never encountered a species that accepted such offers once fighting had begun. Humans of New Dakota, his amplified voice carried across the valley. You have chosen to resist the will of the Vorth Collective. Lay down your weapons and submit to processing, and your deaths will be swift. Continue to resist, and you will be eliminated slowly. The response came in the form of concentrated fire from multiple positions. The humans had established overlapping fields of fire that forced his soldiers to take cover behind rocky outcroppings and use their shields more aggressively than expected. Kethvar felt a slight stirring of interest. Most species either fled immediately or died in the first exchange of weapons fire. These humans were at least attempting to fight back with some semblance of organization, but organization could only compensate for technological inferiority to a limited degree. His soldiers' plasma weapons had superior range and accuracy compared to the humans' kinetic rifles. Their energy shields could absorb dozens of human shots before requiring recharge. Their armor could withstand direct hits from anything short of heavy explosives. The outcome was inevitable. The only question was how long the humans would take to realize their situation was hopeless. As Kethvar led his squad forward toward the first defensive line, he wondered if these humans would show more courage than the crystalline beings of Theta Prime, who had simply dissolved themselves rather than face capture. Or perhaps they would be like the hive minds of Sector 7, who had fought with desperate fury until the very end. Either way, by sunset, this small human colony would be nothing more than another entry in his mission reports. Another species that had chosen extinction over wisdom. The first human defensive line crumbled faster than Kethvar had expected, but not in the way he had anticipated. Instead of breaking and running when faced with superior firepower, the human defenders conducted what appeared to be an organized withdrawal to secondary positions. They moved with purpose and coordination that suggested actual military training rather than panicked retreat. Kethvar watched through his tactical display as Squad Alpha reported similar experiences on the eastern approach. The humans were not simply abandoning their positions. They were trading space for time while maintaining their defensive structure. More concerning, they appeared to be drawing the Vorth forces deeper into the settlement where the terrain became more complex. Sub-Commander Grexth reports contact with defensive positions, came the voice through his comm system. Human resistance is heavier than anticipated. They have established killing zones using mining equipment as cover and appear to have detailed knowledge of approach routes. Kethvar acknowledged the report while advancing through what had been the settlement's outer residential area. The humans had not simply fled their homes, they had turned them into defensive positions. Windows had been reinforced with metal plating from mining equipment. Doorways had been blocked to create choke points that forced attacking soldiers into predetermined kill zones. His tactical sensors detected movement in a building to his left. 3 heat signatures, positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire on the street his squad was using. Standard suppression doctrine called for destroying the building with plasma charges, but something made him pause. The movement patterns were too organized, too professional. These were not panicked civilians hiding in their homes. They were soldiers who knew exactly what they were doing. Squad Gamma, advance with caution, he ordered. Human defensive preparations are more sophisticated than intelligence indicated. The warning proved prescient when the building ahead of them exploded outward in a cascade of metal and stone. Not from Vorth weapons, but from charges the humans had placed and detonated as his soldiers approached. The blast was precisely timed to catch his lead elements in the open street where they could not take cover. 2 of his soldiers went down immediately, their energy shields overloaded by the concentrated force of the explosion. A third staggered backward with damaged armor that sparked and smoked from the impact. These were not random explosions. They were carefully planned traps set by someone who understood tactical deployment. Through the smoke and debris, Kethvar saw a human figure moving between the buildings. Male, wearing what appeared to be modified mining gear that had been reinforced with metal plating. He carried a rifle that looked like standard human military equipment, but he moved with the confidence of someone who had used such weapons extensively. The human stopped behind a pile of rubble and looked directly at Kethvar through the scope of his rifle. For a moment, their eyes met across the battlefield. The human's face showed no fear, no desperation, only cold determination and something that looked almost like pity. Jake Morrison, Kethvar realized. The settlement leader was not hiding in some bunker waiting for the battle to end. He was actively leading the defense of his people. The human fired 3 shots in rapid succession, each one aimed at the joints. In Kethvar's armor, where the energy shield was weakest, the impacts forced him to dive for cover behind an overturned mining vehicle. When he looked up again, Morrison had already moved to a new position. All squads report status, Kethvar commanded, beginning to feel the first stirrings of something he had not experienced in many years: uncertainty. Squad Alpha has encountered heavy resistance at the mining facility, Grexth reported. The humans have converted mining lasers into defensive weapons and established interlocking fields of fire. We have lost 4 soldiers and are unable to advance. Squad Beta reports similar conditions at the southern approach. Human defenders are using mining tunnels to move between positions without being detected. They appear everywhere we are not, and nowhere we expect them to be. Kethvar processed this information while plasma bolts from human positions forced him to keep his head down. This was not how pacification campaigns were supposed to proceed. Inferior species were supposed to break under the initial assault, not adapt and counterattack with increasing effectiveness. A new voice came through his comm system, one of his soldiers screaming in pain and terror. The transmission cut off abruptly, followed by an explosion that shook the ground beneath his feet. Someone had set off mining charges under one of his squads. "This is Squad Beta," came another report. "We are under attack by human civilians using improvised weapons. A female with mechanical training has somehow modified mining equipment into mobile weapons platforms. She is coordinating with other non-combatants to establish ambush positions." Lisa Carter, Kethvar thought, recalling the intelligence files. A maintenance engineer who had worked on industrial equipment before joining the colony. Intelligence had classified her as a non-combatant, but she was apparently using her technical skills to turn mining tools into instruments of war. The battle, that should have ended in hours, was stretching into its second day. Kethavar's forces had advanced less than halfway through the settlement, and they had already lost more soldiers than in his previous 3 campaigns combined. The humans were not just fighting, they were fighting smart. They used their knowledge of the terrain to appear where his forces were weakest and disappear before concentrated fire could eliminate them. They coordinated their attacks to maximize damage while minimizing their own exposure. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to be getting better at fighting Vorth soldiers as the battle continued. "Commander," came a transmission from one of his remaining squad leaders. "We have encountered a human defensive position at what appears to be an educational facility. The building is heavily fortified and defended by approximately 20 humans, including several juveniles. Request permission to use heavy plasma charges to eliminate the position." Kethvar considered the request while ducking another precisely aimed shot from Morrison's rifle. The human leader had somehow managed to stay ahead of Vorth advances, appearing at each critical defensive position to coordinate resistance efforts. He seemed to be everywhere at once, rallying his people and directing their defensive efforts with skill that belied his supposed lack of tactical experience. "Negative on heavy plasma charges," Kethvar responded. "Advance carefully and eliminate resistance with standard weapons." He was not sure why he had given that order. Standard doctrine called for overwhelming force against any significant resistance. But something about the idea of destroying a building full of human children with explosives made him hesitate. The third day of fighting brought new horrors. The humans had stopped retreating entirely and were now conducting counterattacks against Vorth positions. They moved through mining tunnels that honeycombed the ground beneath the settlement, appearing behind his soldiers and attacking with improvised weapons that should not have been effective against modern armor. But they were effective. Somehow, these primitive humans had figured out weaknesses in Vorth equipment that military engineers from dozens of species had failed to discover. They attacked joints in armor plating, overloaded energy shield generators, and used their own mining explosives in ways that maximized damage to advanced technology. Kethvar found himself trapped in a building that had once been someone's home, surrounded by the debris of a family's life. Children's drawings were still attached to one wall, showing stick figures playing under a yellow sun. A kitchen table was set for dinner that would never be eaten. Outside, he could hear Jake Morrison's voice calling instructions to his people. The human leader sounded tired but unbroken. He was still fighting, still leading, still refusing to accept the inevitable outcome of a battle between superior and inferior forces. But the inevitable was taking much longer than anyone had expected, and the cost was becoming higher than Kethvar had ever imagined possible. The final assault on the human stronghold began at dawn on the 5th day. Kethvar had lost 43 of his 50 soldiers, and the 7 survivors moved through the burning settlement like ghosts haunting a graveyard. The human resistance had been broken not through superior tactics or overwhelming force, but through simple attrition. They had finally run out of ammunition, explosives, and people capable of fighting. The last defensive position was the settlement's medical facility, a reinforced building that the humans had turned into their final fortress. Smoke rose from dozens of fires throughout New Dakota, and the morning air carried the smell of death and destruction that Kethvar had experienced on many worlds. But this time, the familiar sense made him feel sick rather than satisfied. Through his helmet's sensors, he could detect perhaps 15 human heat signatures still alive inside the medical building. After 5 days of fighting, these were all that remained of the 300 souls who had called this place home. Intelligence had been wrong about everything: the defensive capabilities, the fighting spirit, and especially the timeline for completing this mission. Jake Morrison's voice. echoed from the building's external speakers, transmitted through whatever communication system the humans had rigged together. "Vorth Commander, I know you can hear me. My name is Jake Morrison, and I want you to know something before this ends." Kethvar activated his own external speakers, but found himself unable to respond. What could he say to this human who had cost him more soldiers than any enemy he had ever faced? "We could have surrendered on the first day," Morrison continued. "We could have run into the mountains and hidden until you got bored and left. But we didn't do either of those things. Do you know why?" The question hung in the air between them while Kethvar positioned his remaining soldiers around the building. Standard doctrine called for immediate assault, but something made him wait for Morrison to continue speaking. "Because this is our home. These are our families, our friends, our children. We built something here with our own hands, and we weren't going to let anyone take it away without a fight. Not even someone like you with all your fancy weapons and armor." Kethvar felt an unfamiliar emotion stirring in his chest, something that might have been respect for an enemy who had fought far better than anyone had expected. But respect was not part of Vorth military doctrine, and emotions were weaknesses that led to defeat. "You want to know what I think about your collective?" Morrison asked. "I think you're bullies who pick on people weaker than you because you're afraid to fight someone your own size. I think you hide behind superior technology because you don't have the courage to face an enemy on equal terms." The words "should" have meant nothing to Kethvar. He had been insulted by defeated enemies before, and their opinions had never mattered. But somehow, Morrison's voice carried a weight that made the accusations feel like physical blows. "But you know what? You may kill us all today, but you didn't break us. 5 days. And you couldn't make us quit. That has to count for something, even in your book." Kethvar ordered his soldiers to breach the building. They moved with practiced efficiency, using shaped charges to blow open reinforced doors and energy, weapons to clear defensive positions. The humans inside fought to the end with improvised weapons and desperate courage, but 7 Vorth soldiers in powered armor were too much for 15 exhausted civilians to stop. He found Jake Morrison in the building's central corridor, collapsed against a wall with a plasma wound in his chest. The human leader was still alive, barely, and his eyes tracked to Kethvar as the Vorth commander approached. Did the children get away?" Morrison whispered through blood-flecked lips. Kethvar knew that 27 human juveniles had escaped into the mountain caves during the early stages of the fighting. Standard procedure required hunting them down and eliminating them to prevent future resistance. But looking into Morrison's dying eyes, he found himself nodding. "Yes," he said. "They got away." Morrison smiled and closed his eyes. "Good. That's all that matters." The human leader died with that smile on his face, and Kethvar stood looking down at him for a long time. This man had cost him more soldiers than any enemy commander he had ever faced, but he had died satisfied because some of his people had survived. The concept was alien to Vorth thinking, where individual survival was always the primary goal. In the medical bay, Kethvar found the body of a human female who had apparently given birth during the siege, Amy Foster, according to the identification tags she wore. She lay on a medical table with her arms wrapped around a small bundle that turned out to be her newborn infant. The child was somehow still alive, protected by its mother's body from the fighting that had raged around them. Kethvar picked up the baby and found himself staring into tiny human eyes that seemed to look directly at him. The infant made small noises but did not cry, as if it understood the gravity of the situation. Its mother had died protecting it, just as Morrison had died protecting the escaped children, just as all of them had died protecting something they valued more than their own lives. He had never encountered anything like it in 17 previous campaigns. Other species fought for territory, resources, or survival. But these humans had fought for something that transcended individual existence. They had fought for the idea that some things were worth dying for, The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was not a warrior defending his people or a soldier following legitimate orders. He was a killer who destroyed families and dreams and futures for the expansion of an empire that gave nothing back to the universe except death and conquest. One of his surviving soldiers approached to report that the settlement had been completely secured. "Commander, what are your orders regarding the escaped juveniles? Standard protocol requires—" "No," Kethvar interrupted. "We will report that all humans were eliminated during the fighting. The escaped juveniles died in the mountain caves and their bodies were destroyed by avalanches." The soldier looked confused but acknowledged the order. Kethvar knew he was violating collective protocol, but he found that he no longer cared about protocols or proper procedures or the expansion of the empire. He looked down at the human infant in his arms and made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The child would be left with the other survivors, hidden in the caves where the collective would never find them. He would file a report claiming complete success while knowing that he had failed in the most fundamental way possible. He had discovered something about himself that he had never suspected, that even a Vorth warrior trained from birth to kill, without question could be changed by witnessing true courage. The humans of New Dakota had infected him with something his species had no word for, something that made him question everything he had believed about strength and weakness, victory and defeat. As he walked through the burning settlement toward his transport ship, Kethvar carried the weight of what he had done and what he had failed to do. Behind him lay the bodies of brave humans who had died defending their home. Ahead of him lay a return to the collective and the pretense that nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The darkness was already beginning to gather in his mind, and he knew with terrible certainty that it would never let him rest again. Kethvar returned to the collective fleet as a decorated hero, his mission report filed and accepted without question. The brass awarded him commendations for exceptional service in the face of unexpectedly heavy resistance. His surviving soldiers were promoted and reassigned to other units. The official record showed a complete victory achieved within acceptable parameters, despite the unusually high casualty rate. But the official record was a lie, and Kethvar carried that lie with him every moment of every day. The dreams began during his first sleep cycle back aboard the flagship. Jake Morrison stood in his quarters wearing the same blood-stained clothes he had died in, asking the same question over and over: "Why did we have to die? Why couldn't you have just left us alone?" Kethvar would wake from these dreams with his body covered in sweat and his heart's racing. He tried to tell himself it was normal combat stress, the kind that affected all soldiers after difficult campaigns. But he had never experienced anything like this after his previous 17 victories. The dreams grew more vivid as the days passed. Lisa Carter appeared in his quarters, still wearing her mechanic's coveralls and carrying the improvised weapons she had used against his soldiers. She never spoke, just stood there looking at him with eyes that held no anger, only sadness. Sometimes she would shake her head slowly, as if disappointed by something she saw in him. Amy Foster was the worst. She would appear holding her infant, the child that Kethvar had left with the survivors in the mountain caves. The baby would reach toward him with tiny hands, while its mother asked, "Will you protect him? Will you keep him safe from people? Like you?" During his waking hours, Kethvar tried to maintain the facade of a successful Vorth warrior. He attended briefings, reviewed tactical reports, and prepared for his next assignment. But concentration became increasingly difficult as the ghosts of New Dakota intruded on his daily routine. He would be studying star charts when Jake Morrison would appear beside him, pointing at colony worlds and asking, "Are these next? Are you going to kill all of them too?" During weapons training, Lisa Carter would stand near the target dummies, making him see human faces instead of practice targets. The worst moments came during meals. Kethvar would sit in the officers' mess, Hall surrounded by his fellow warriors, and suddenly the taste of food would turn to ash in his mouth. He would see Amy Foster sitting across from him, still holding her baby, still asking him to protect the children he had abandoned in the caves. His fellow officers began to notice his deteriorating condition. Commander Zixith called him in for a private meeting after Kethvar had been observed talking to empty air during a tactical briefing. "Your recent performance has been noted by the command staff," Zixith said, his 3 eyes studying Kethvar with cold efficiency. "Several officers have reported observing unusual behavior patterns. Are you experiencing combat fatigue?" Kethvar considered telling the truth, that he was being haunted by the ghosts of humans he had killed, that he could no longer sleep without seeing their faces, that the very thought of killing again made him physically ill. Instead, he simply nodded. "The human resistance was more intense than anticipated," he said. "The casualties were heavy. Perhaps some time for recovery would be beneficial." Zixith made notes on his tactical pad while considering the request. "The medical staff will conduct a full psychological evaluation. If they find evidence of combat trauma, you will be assigned to recuperation duties until you are fit for field operations. The psychological evaluation found nothing wrong with Kethvar's neural patterns or brain." Chemistry. Vorth medical science was advanced enough to detect most forms of mental distress, but it had no framework for understanding guilt or conscience. The doctors declared him physically fit for duty and recommended immediate return to active operations. His next assignment came within days of being cleared for duty. Another human colony, this one on a world called Haven's Rest. Intelligence reported similar conditions to New Dakota: civilian miners and their families, basic defensive capabilities, estimated completion time of 4 to 6 hours. Kethvar accepted the assignment because refusing would have raised questions he could not answer. But as his new strike force prepared for deployment, he found himself studying the intelligence files with growing horror. Haven's Rest had been established by refugees from the outer colonies, families seeking peace and safety in the remote reaches of human space. The settlement included a school, a medical facility, and residential areas where children played in streets that would soon run red with blood. The night before the assault, Kethvar sat in his quarters staring at surveillance images of the colony. Children walked to school carrying books and lunch containers. Adults worked in the mining operations, talking and laughing with their colleagues. Families gathered in the evening to share meals and tell stories. They had no idea what was coming for them. Jake Morrison appeared in the chair across from Kethvar's desk, looking exactly as he had in those final moments before death. "You're going to do it again, aren't you? You're going to kill more families, more children." "I have no choice," Kethvar whispered. "If I refuse the mission, they will know something is wrong. They will investigate, and they will discover what I did at New Dakota." "So you'll kill more innocents to cover up killing innocents?" Lisa Carter materialized beside Morrison, her tools still in her hands. "How does that make any sense?" Amy Foster appeared last, holding her baby and looking at Kethvar with infinite sadness. "You could save them. You could warn them, help them escape. You could choose to be something other than a killer." Kethvar buried his face in his hands, trying to shut out the voices of the dead. But they were not really external voices, and he knew it. They were the voice of his own conscience, speaking through the faces of those he had wronged. The assault on Haven's Rest was scheduled to begin in 8 hours. His strike force was already loaded aboard the transport ships, weapons checked and armor powered. Everything was ready for another routine extermination mission, but Kethvar found himself unable to give the order to launch. He sat in the command center watching the countdown timer, paralyzed by the knowledge of what he was about to do and his inability to stop it. The ghosts of New Dakota stood around him, not accusing, but waiting to see what choice he would make when faced with the opportunity to save lives instead of taking them. For the first time in his military career, Kethvar understood that he had a choice. The realization was terrifying and liberating at the same time. The transport ships launched on schedule toward Haven's Rest, but Kethavar had made his choice during the long night of wrestling with ghosts. As the fleet approached the human colony, he activated a secure communication channel and transmitted a warning message directly to the settlement's communication array. Human colony. Haven's Rest. This is a priority alert, he broadcast, knowing that every word was a betrayal of everything he had been trained to believe. Vorth collective forces are approaching your position with orders to eliminate all inhabitants. You have approximately 2 hours to evacuate. This is not a deception or psychological warfare. Your lives are in immediate danger. The response came quickly from the colony's communication center. A human voice, male and authoritative, replied with surprising calm. Unknown sender, this is Colonel Ryan Matthews, Haven's Rest Security Chief. Can you verify the nature and strength of the approaching threat? Kethavar hesitated for a moment before responding. Matthews was military, which meant he would understand tactical information and might be able to organize an effective defense or evacuation. 50 Vorth soldiers in powered armor with plasma weapons and energy shields. Standard extermination. Protocol. No prisoners will be taken. Understood. Can you provide information about their approach vectors and tactical deployment? The question hung in the air while Kethavar realized he was crossing a line from which there could be no return. Providing tactical information to humans about Vorth military operations was not just disobedience, it was treason, punishable by execution. But in his mind, he could see Jake Morrison's face and Lisa Carter's hands covered in grease from building, weapons to defend her home, and Amy Foster holding her newborn child. The dead of New Dakota watched him make his choice. Primary assault will come from the south with 2 flanking forces from east and west, he transmitted. Transport ships will land approximately 3 kilometers from your perimeter. Standard Vorth doctrine calls for immediate overwhelming assault to prevent organized resistance. Matthews acknowledged the information and signed off to coordinate his colony's response. Kethavar sat in his command chair, watching the tactical displays show his own forces approaching their target, knowing that he had just ensured their failure. His strike force landed on schedule and deployed according to standard protocols. But instead of finding an unprepared civilian population, they encountered prepared defensive positions and coordinated resistance that suggested detailed advance warning. The humans had used their 2-hour advantage to evacuate non-combatants and establish killing zones that maximized casualties among attacking forces. "Commander, we are encountering heavy resistance," reported his lead squad. "The humans appear to have advanced knowledge of our tactical deployment. They are prepared for our approach vectors and have established crossfire positions covering all landing zones." Kethavar acknowledged the reports while watching his soldiers walk into traps that he had made possible. The guilt was overwhelming, but it was balanced by something he had never felt before: the satisfaction of saving innocent lives instead of taking them. The battle for Haven's Rest lasted 3 days, but the outcome was different from New Dakota. Colonel Matthews had used the advance warning to evacuate all civilians to prepared shelters in the surrounding hills. The military personnel who remained fought a delaying action designed to give their families time to escape rather than to win an impossible victory. When the fighting ended, Kethavar's forces had taken the settlement, but they had captured an empty prize. The humans had denied them the massacre they had come to accomplish, and most of the colony's population had escaped to safety. But Kethavar's betrayal had not gone unnoticed. His own soldiers had monitored communication channels and detected the warning transmission. Sub-Commander Grexith confronted him as they stood in the abandoned colony's central square. "You warned them," Grexith said, his weapon drawn and aimed at Kethavar's chest. "You betrayed the collective and your own soldiers." Kethavar could have denied it or made excuses, but he found himself too tired to lie anymore. "Yes, I warned them." "Why?" What could possibly make you betray your own species for these primitive humans? The question deserved an honest answer, even if Grexith would never understand it. Because I learned something at New Dakota that I had never known before. I learned what courage really looks like and what honor really means. These humans taught me that there are things worth dying for and things worth living for. Grexith's mandibles clicked in confusion. You speak nonsense. Honor comes from serving the collective. Courage is following orders regardless of personal cost. No, Kethavar said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Courage is doing what's right, even when it costs you everything. Honor is protecting the innocent, not slaughtering them for resources. Grexith raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Kethavar activated his personal communicator and transmitted directly to the collective command frequency. Every ship in the fleet would receive his message, and there would be no hiding what he had done. This is Commander Kethavar speaking to all collective forces. I have betrayed my orders and warned the human colony of our approach. I have committed treason against the collective, and I accept full responsibility for my actions. The communication channel erupted with confused voices demanding explanations, but Kethavar continued speaking over the chaos. The humans of New Dakota taught me something that our training never did. They showed me that there is a difference between strength and brutality, between victory and honor. They died defending their families and their homes, and they died with more courage than I have shown in 17 campaigns of slaughter. He could see Grexith hesitating, uncertain whether to shoot a commander who was publicly confessing his crimes. Around the square, other Vorth soldiers were emerging from buildings to listen to the transmission that was being broadcast across the entire fleet. I will not serve the collective anymore, Kethavar declared. I will not kill families for mining rights or destroy colonies for strategic resources. If that makes me a traitor, then I accept that title with pride. The response from Fleet Command came swiftly. Commander Kethavar, you are relieved of duty and ordered to return to the flagship for immediate court-martial. Any soldier who follows your example will be executed as a traitor. Kethavar looked at Grexith and the other soldiers surrounding him. Some showed confusion, others anger, but a few seemed to be thinking about his words. He had planted seeds of doubt that might grow into something larger. I will not return to face execution for choosing conscience over blind obedience, he transmitted. But I have one final message for any soldier listening who has ever wondered if there might be a better way to live than as instruments of destruction. He paused, seeing Jake Morrison standing beside him one last time. The ghost of the human. Leader nodded encouragingly, as if to say that some words were worth speaking regardless of the consequences. The humans fight for their children, their homes, their future. What do we fight for? The expansion of an empire that gives nothing back to the galaxy except death and suffering. We call ourselves warriors, but we are nothing more than killers who prey on the weak because we lack the courage to face equals. The communication channel fell silent as Kethavar's words sank in. He could see his soldiers looking at each other with uncertainty, perhaps wondering for the first time what they were really fighting for. Any soldier who wishes to continue serving the collective may do so with my blessing, Kethavar continued. But any who wish to find a different path, a better path, can follow me. We will fight alongside the species we once hunted. We will protect instead of destroy. We will finally learn what it means to be worthy of the term warrior. Grexith lowered his weapon, conflict visible in his expression. Commander, you are asking us to become traitors to our own species. I am asking you to become something better than what we have been, Kethavar replied. The choice is yours. 3 of his soldiers stepped forward to join him. Others backed away, loyal to the collective despite their doubts. The majority remained frozen in uncertainty, caught between a lifetime of conditioning and the possibility of redemption. Colonel Matthews appeared at the edge of the square, flanked by human soldiers but making no aggressive moves. Commander Kethavar, I monitored your transmission. If you're serious about fighting alongside us instead of against us, we could use someone with your tactical knowledge." Kethvar looked at the human officer, who represented everything he had once been sent to destroy. Matthews showed no fear, no hatred, only the same quiet determination that Jake Morrison had displayed in his final moments. "I am serious," Kethvar said, "but you should know that I have the blood of your people on my hands. I killed Jake Morrison and Lisa Carter and Amy Foster and hundreds of others whose only crime was wanting to live in peace." "I know," Matthews replied. "Jake Morrison was my friend, but he also taught me that redemption is always possible for those willing to pay the price for it."